Thank you so much for being here. One of the most important findings in your research is despite the fact that residents report countless incidents of being directly and indirectly involved with violence, can you fix the mic, please? They remain hopeful and confident and optimistic. How do you interpret this? What do you take away from this in terms of how this community and other communities can make positive change?
I think this is actually a very consistent finding in the literature. I think the fact that they have high levels of psychological and social well-being, they have high levels of esteem, like low-income black and brown folk, in this case low-income black folk, high levels of esteem, group esteem, social esteem. And I think that finding, interestingly enough, although consistent in the criminal justice system, that kind of finding is actually intuitive inside these communities and counterintuitive outside of these communities. It's more of a surprise, I say often enough, for folk who reside outside of the communities, that poor black and brown folk who are surrounded by violence can actually love themselves. And it's a big debate in psychology literature. I'm a psychologist, so that is a thriving debate there. Newsweek, about a year ago, in their article entitled Murder Town, which is the name of that article, and I think will be the name of the TV series.
Yeah, it was just announced today. ABC's promoting a pilot called Murder Town, based in Wilmington.
Yeah. But in that article that was released a year ago, they actually talked a lot about, and talked with other scholars about that finding. And they also reinforced the fact that it's actually pretty consistent, in most poor neighborhoods.
So what kind of progress have you made since this film was released? Where are you at now? What other projects are you working on?
Great question. So I can say now 12 of the PAR members are employed. And our standard for employment is $15 to $20 an hour, right? A lot of them are trained with research-related skill sets, and a number of them have worked on a number of well-funded research projects for UD and other institutions. 6 have enrolled in college, 2 have completed their Masters of Arts degrees. Those same 2 are in doctoral programs now. We have one gentleman who actually graduated with his undergraduate degree and is in the process of applying for a master's program. We've been doing a lot of speaking, so we've probably given upwards 150 to 200 presentations at this point. We have a round of grants that are out right now to do PAR Project Part 2. So we're still at it, we're still very busy, we're still organizing a lot in the community, we're still doing a lot of activism everywhere we can. I've also released another documentary, entitled The Streets of Harlem, so another community.
And both of those are available for purchase on thepeoplesreport.org?
Yeah, so the People's Report is available for purchase, and all money that we get goes to a research account to fund the next project. The Streets of Harlem is not actually released now. It's during the film festival cycle. During that cycle, it can't be released. But in about a year or so, it will be made available.
Great. So many of our students throughout this semester have asked, what can they do, particularly white students who want to be allies? What can students on this campus do to help people in these communities? What can they do to be allies?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And the reason why I say that is this. First thing I want to say is this. I think a lot can be done, right? But the fact, you underscore, students who may be white, right? I think at the end of the day, love is the currency with regard to working with this population. So you don't have to be black, you don't have to be from the streets, you don't have to be from poor neighborhoods, you don't have to, have that kind of experience to be able to reach and connect with folk on the ground. I often say, I'll take 10 white people from rich and wealthy neighborhoods before I take 10 black men from the streets of criminal justice system who think they know everything, because that doesn't actually work, right? So that's the first thing I want to underscore. If I were students here at the University of Delaware, right, this is what I would encourage. Keep in mind, most Tier 1, Research 1 universities do not do this kind of work, right? So the idea that the opportunity is even available for students to jump on a project like this and engage in, right, that opportunity is few and far between. Right? I was lucky enough to be trained as a doctoral student in a doctoral program that trains you just for this. I didn't realize, I was naive, I'm first generation everything. So I didn't realize how rare the experience that I actually was receiving. So with that said, right, still think a lot can be done. If I were you, I would strongly encourage the chairs of your departments, strongly encourage the dean's office, and I'm talking about email, phone calls, knocking on doors. I would strongly encourage the provost's office and the president's office, right, for the necessary infrastructure and resources, right, to organize projects like this. So I think with more pressure put on faculty, put on the administration, they can provide the kinds of opportunities so that we can do this, right, and actually get rewarded for doing it. Keep in mind, if you engage in action as a faculty member, in most instances you get no credit for that, right? That's not, you know, and it's institutional. It's not a UD thing. It's not unique to UD, but you get no real points for that. Right? All that's on your own time, and it is pretty time-consuming. I think it's necessary, but it is time-consuming. So my point is, we need a radical transformation with regard to our research culture, right? And I think we are at a point here at UD where administration and/or the dean's office and/or other departments and faculty member, right? They are trying to figure out how we can do more of this, given the interest with researchers and students. So there are folk doing different things. I think you need to just, you know, ask around. Definitely send me some emails. I can, depending on your interest, I can point you in the right directions. Again, we have a round of grants that are out right now. We're looking to get back on the ground next year to do a much larger study, a more robust study. So you know, we just got to keep. We just have to continue to agitate a little bit longer.
Great, thank you. Before I open it up to the audience, I found it really profound that you said, I got a PhD for one reason, the liberation of my people. So what would you say to students of color who are interested in pursuing a higher education, or maybe who haven't considered higher education but might want to consider it?
Yeah, I totally strongly encourage you, please go get a PhD, definitely. And try and be a scholar activist, right? And by that I mean, you know, let the knowledge that you learn, let the methodologies that you acquire, you know, not only get a mastery in terms of how to do intellectual analysis, but also how to marry that with some on-the-ground activism. I got a PhD for the liberation of my people. I was a social activist before I actually went to graduate school. And a lawyer that I was working with at the time suggested that I go off and get a PhD, and it'd bring more legitimacy to my work. I was actually doing this kind of work, but it was street outreach. Then I went off to a doctoral program and learned about this thing called PAR. I think one of the best lessons that I've learned as a doctoral student from my doctoral advisor, Michelle Fine, a lot of times in doctoral programs, they'll tell you to kind of hold off on your passion related to research, do that later when you get established. Right? And I guess that's sometime after tenure. So that's a long time from PhD to tenure. But what she told me was this: start right now. Everything you want to do. That's what I did as a doctoral student. All right, she said, start right now. Become the person that you want to be right now. Don't wait until some moment in the distant future, right, to begin figuring out who you want to be and how you want to be it. Right, so you know, I would say definitely run off, get into PhD programs. They're very competitive, I think, but I think you should push for that. And you should develop your professional identities right now. And you can develop it in such a way where you can hold on to the integrity of your cultural identity. Right? Don't compromise that for anybody. It's not worth it. And at the end of the day, I'll be honest with you, nobody respects that person anyway.
Wow, thank you. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So if you want to raise your hand. Yeah, right here, Julie.
So I'm in the sale of this idea. What are the hard sales? I mean, when you talk to a lot of different groups, a lot of different people, what's your hardest sell?
So I'll repeat it just for purpose of the audience hearing it. So basically she's saying, you know, I'm sold, this is a great idea. How do you convince people who aren't immediately sold that this is a valuable path of research?
I haven't ran into too many people that, and mind you, right, keep in mind, there are versions of PAR research or action research that are light with research and heavy with action, right? And that's mostly the rap that it gets. And I would argue, oftentimes that rap is legitimate, right? I'm very critical of the PAR literature myself. That is not the brand or version of PAR that we do. So we publish all the time, right? We're in the process of turning this into a book project. We're at your latest academic conference. We're applying for a lot of the traditional grants from NIH and other places. So we take the academic and the research sense very seriously. Right? We don't even compromise that stuff. When we train the men and women in the community, this is probably my 8th or so PAR project from New York City down to Delaware. Like, you know, it's one of the most rigorous research methods training. We're speaking with them about regressions and scale development and in addition to qualitative methodology as well, right? And so, given I'm doing that brand or version of PAR, it's not a hard sell. I do think it is difficult, particularly if you've been trained in PAR, to do all of the above, right? If you don't have a model or a frame of reference to work from, to do the action and to do really good scholarship, right? So first and foremost, we do not compromise the scholarship, right? And if I trained them in a way where it was watered down, it would be difficult for me to get them opportunities, like in graduate school or undergraduate programs. So we don't do that. I would say, though, the most difficult challenge in general, at the end of the day, our argument is a structural violence or structural inequality argument, right? And I don't mean to challenge anyone's sensibilities, right? But at the end of the day, right, we're asking them, and we found in our study that economic well-being was predictive of experiences with violence, right? That is, economic well-being increased, experiences with violence is decreased in the city. So our argument is structural violence, right? We're arguing that these communities have been sustained for centuries in extreme economic poverty. That is the argument that's tough, right? So what do I mean by that, okay? And this is where I don't mean to challenge your sensibilities, but it is true though, right? Keep in mind, economic poverty is required. Make no mistake about it. Unemployment, poor schooling opportunities, bad health conditions, poor living conditions are required so that people like you and me can enjoy our privilege. That is how it works. There is no this without them. That's the hard sell, meaning behind closed doors from the governor's office all the way down to the street corners. Right? This is the kind of conversation that I have with the facts and the data. I'm not shooting from the hip here. You can ask you can ask any economist this argument, right? They will tell, yeah, it is true. Right, so really the question or the difficult conversation, right? I get no disagreement neither with civic and political leadership, even about this, right? Behind closed doors, they'll say you're right. And my people have disproportionately been identified to be the out group, right? Poverty ensures a cheap labor base. Poverty also brings value to the currency. That's why they're necessary. So the question or the pushback to some extent is, well, how do we change that system? Right? Because, you know, changing capitalism or changing the economic system can be challenging. And so while I get an agreement with regard to that's what's going on, for obvious reasons, it's a challenge because you cannot easily change that system. I actually disagree with that. I think there are numerous examples of large social structural change in our American history in a small period of time. Michelle Alexander reminds us of that in The New Jim Crow. That's the big question she gets. Check that book out if you haven't. Right? She cites and she says there are numerous examples of large social structural change in small periods of time. It's just what do we have the political and the moral will for? Dr. Angela Davis argues that the emancipation of Black America, that the quest for emancipation for Black America has always been a quest for economic liberation. So I would say that's the tough challenge, structural violence.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Yes?
So at the end of the video, it said you planned on expanding the research and going to other places. What other places specifically have you gone to?
So yeah, where have you taken this project since this project ended?
Yeah, so I've done about 8 or so PAR projects. I have primarily done PAR projects from New York State, a place called Newburgh in New York State, obviously New York City, all 5 boroughs, primarily in Harlem though. all the way down here to Delaware, right? And I've worked on other research projects besides PAR, involving the criminal justice population as well. So there have been other PAR projects in which I've consulted on, right? So they've highlighted, 2 of them in the film. So one in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and they're just pulling their data together now, the actual researchers at the University of Maryland. But they have some really impressive findings. And there's a project out in South Central that's still ongoing as well. We presented at Teachers College, Columbia University a year ago, that project in LA. So I've consulted on those projects. Have lots of conversations with a number of scholars around the country who want to do this, do similar work. And the larger goal in my career, what I was saying at the end of the film, was to organize a national street PAR project. So maybe we identify, 2 or 3 dozen, neighborhoods, throughout the country, from Harlem to LA, from Chi-Town down to Houston. So that is a larger goal. That after I do that project, I'll retire, But, but I would say in terms of me on the ground, I'm doing PAR work. That's New York State down to Delaware.
Great. I think we've got a question all the way in the back.
Although movies and television are a good way of promoting media for a spreading cause, how often do you think entertainment is looked at as just entertainment? And how often do you think television actually affirms stereotypes, such as TV shows such as Black Asian, like George Will.
This is a great question, and one that I actually meant to ask myself anyway. So, how do television and movies sort of, I think the idea is sort of reinforce some of these stereotypes that we have, particularly of inner city neighborhoods. And I was thinking about shows like Empire, that while they're very empowering, in a lot of ways they sort of reinforce these same stereotypes. What role do media, film and television play in sort of reinforcing this, or are they overcoming these stereotypes?
Yeah, interesting question. Really good question. I teach a class on gangster rap music, and we talk a lot about this as well. Check it out, spring 2016. This has been going on a very long time in American history, and definitely as it relates to the Black community. We can probably see the most sharpest example during the end of the period of slavery. You had the rise of the Jim Crow era, right? But it actually began at the tail end of the period of slavery. Jim Crow, right, itself was created by a guy by the name of Thomas Dartmouth Rice in 1828, right? He would go around in blackface, and this is, their form of kind of entertainment at that time, right? He would do these shows, these minstrel shows.
And I'll remind everybody that the last film we watched was Bamboozled, which definitely got at these issues.
Yeah, right, and he would go around because the South understood that it was losing its control over this institution of slavery, right? And so it would go around and provide entertainment, it would provide messaging. Sometimes Black people would be involved or perform, and it would help to kind of rationalize these kind of these images of inferiority of Black America at that time, and how it was better for them to remain slaves or subservient or submissive, right? And they were very funny, and we would laugh and chuckle, and it would kind of pacify us, right? So that has happened for a very long time, up until this point. So I do think I love the idea of film and social media, right? And follow us if you can, People's Report, Facebook, Twitter, Google+. We have a YouTube page, and we're very active. So I do appreciate it all. But I think there are strengths and limitations. I think it's very powerful and also very dangerous at the same time. So I think mass media, particularly newsprint, internet, TV, all the way to the shows, right? Empire and Power and all of that. I think in most instances, at least those kind of shows and representations, probably bastardizing the integrity of Black America. I think they exaggerate and they exacerbate what it's really like to live inside these communities. Keep in mind, right, homicide only accounts for less than 1% of the total population. About 15,000 people actually get killed by another person. You're far more likely to die from alcohol-related death or disease or something else, right? Chicago's at a 30 or 40-year low with regard to homicides. But turn on your TV, right? It creates the impression as if this is going on every minute. Inner city communities are not a Wild Wild West scenario by any stretch of the imagination. If it was, the National Guard would be called in yesterday, if it was actually that bad. Nobody's gonna rob you because you're standing there. They're most likely to rob each other and feed on each other. I tell police in my police workshops, right, you are the last person that they want to go to war with. It's unnecessary to bring all that kind of military armor or weaponry out there. I tell white people all the time, right, particularly if you're not doing anything wrong out there, you are the last person that they want to do anything to, because law enforcement would spare no resource to account for that transgression. All right, but it would be allowed, particularly if it happens in terms of black-on-black violence. Right, so my point is, I just say all that to say this, that I think media is doing a serious mind job on us all. So folk in middle America and folk in these parts of America. They are warm people. It's more about love there than anything else. Violence is the least activity that explains a street activity. And my work, to be honest with you, is really grounded at restoring the humanity of a people that have been disrespected and dismissed, and sent to wade in a kind of structural rot. All right, so I think the media question is important. We need to push back a lot more, and call for those shows, those representations that are fair and balanced.
Thank you, great question. I think we'll take one more question. Usually we end the program about 9 o'clock. I'd like to encourage everyone to continue talking about this via social media on Twitter. Just tweet at UD Race in America. I see we've got some questions already taking place here, but we'll take one more question right over here.
So the program is generating a lot of data and recommendations. It seems that, well, the document said that it needs, the area needs jobs. What will it take? What needs to happen for jobs to go to the area to solve the issue at hand?
So the documentary says what we need in these communities is jobs. And the question is, how do we get that? How do we accomplish that?
Yeah, so
In 2 minutes.
in 2 minutes. So jobs is, so yes, massive social structural change. That's what's actually needed, right? You can call for more jobs, but unemployment is required. So that's the, where the rubber's hitting the road at, right? So they will help some, but they can't help all, not in our current economic system. That's really what the problem is, right? We can educate everyone in the streets of Wilmington, and it wouldn't matter anyway. There wouldn't be enough jobs in the market for them to be absorbed by. And I've said this to political leadership behind closed doors at the highest order in Delaware, and they agree, right? That's what's really going on, right? So I would say, and I'm actually being optimistic when I say all this, because I do think change can be possible. I know it may not sound like that. Keep this in mind, right? So Delaware is currently under its first state hearing with regard to the criminal justice system and to some extent the economic system, right? First time ever, right? We've made history, all in the newspapers. Right? These hearings are going on from late October to December under Chief Justice Leo Strine and his court, the highest court in Delaware, right? Drawing national attention right now. I think the People's Report, other voices, other groups and organizations have played an instrumental role in bringing about these state hearings. Think about that, right? State hearings on structural violence and how it's impacting poor black and brown people. Right, so we're hoping, we're praying. Right now there are a bunch of hearings, a bunch of experts that are speaking. The community are going to weigh in as well. And usually from state hearings, right after all the experts and all the evidence and all the data's in, God willing, it will lead to, and the conversations are taking place now, to be honest with you, but will lead to some significant policy and structural change. Hopefully some people will be held legally or institutions legally accountable as well. So keeping our fingers crossed, I'm playing an integral role with regard to state hearings. The next one is this Friday at the Riverfront Chase Center, open to the public. You know, we're going to just continue to kind of push and agitate and disrupt in, you know, the wisest and most strategic way possible to kind of bring about real structural change. That's what's needed to bring about the jobs. Chase Center this Friday, Riverfront in Wilmington, Delaware. The time, Jesus Lord. I think things start around 1 or 2. You can Google it though, don't get me to lying. I know they end by 5.
They ended.
Yeah, but so I don't have the specific time. I will be there.
So this information we can find online.
Absolutely.
You can also go to People's Report to get more video footage as well as reports from this project. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank all of you for being here.
Thank you.